Okay, this is David Zierler, Director of the Caltech Heritage Project. It's Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. I'm delighted to be here with Professor Janet Blume. Janet, it's so nice to be with you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Janet, to start, would you please tell me your titles, and I pluralize that, I know you have more than one, and your institutional affiliation?
Right. I'm at Brown University, and right now I'm serving two roles, Deputy Dean of the Faculty and Deputy Provost in a transitional year where there's a new Dean of the Faculty, and as of July 1st, I'll just straight up be Deputy Provost.
So the Deputy Provost for Strategic Initiatives, is that responsive specific to this transition moment, or that position precedes you?
Yeah, it precedes me, right.
What are the kinds of things that you do in that role?
Just about everything, which is why, the move to administration, whether it has been really a very interesting thing and a good thing, because as much as, engineering and solid mechanics and all that is great, there's a whole academic world out there that I'm now privileged to be a part of. So anything from the working on things like the Brown Arts Institute and a new performing arts center and how that should work and be staffed and how that should be integrated with the arts departments, to Native American and Indigenous Studies Initiative, all kinds of academic things that come up across the university and that are not. Some are related to engineering and my background, but most aren't, and so that's really wonderful.
Janet, you're so well positioned. You have a bird's eye view of what's happening at Brown. At the institute level, what are some of the things that are really exciting? What are some new initiatives at Brown that you're excited about?
Let's see, where to begin. We have a new data science institute that I got to be a part of the genesis of that a few years ago, when it was the data science initiative to bring together a group of people to write the proposal for that and get it started. And now it's becoming an institute, the Brown Arts Institute that I mentioned. We have a beautiful, new and very complicated performing arts center that's just opening at the university this fall. So that's really exciting. It's a real state-of-the-art building where it's configurable acoustically and in terms of the stage and seating for choruses, for plays, for orchestras. The walls move in and out and seats come up and down and risers move around. So those are a couple of very exciting things. We're also in a big push to enhance the research profile of the university and taking a lot of steps to build up the research infrastructure and to do things for reevaluate space and the physical sciences and the life sciences, and also for the humanities and social science disciplines to think about what they need to feel like they can write the books that they want and collaborate with each other and with the sciences in other ways as they see fit, but also do their sort of traditional disciplinary work. We're a university that really prides itself in its undergraduate teaching and undergraduate programs, and I think we are probably known as one of the best undergraduate programs in the country, and so that's important to preserve even as the university's research aspirations grow.
Janet, have you been involved in Brown's efforts to become more diverse and inclusive? And
Absolutely.
What have those efforts looked like? What has been Brown's approach?
We had a great approach to start back in 2016 when the university was doing its own global strategic planning. Where a number of academic initiatives and institutes were launched. At the same time, the university developed what we call the Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan, which was a university level plan which included increasing representation in the faculty, in the students, working on inclusion, making, like a very broad and encompassing thing. And there was a commitment to double the percentage of faculty at Brown that self-identified as coming from underrepresented groups. And there were all kinds of other things at the undergraduate level, identifying certain courses that touched issues of diversity and inclusion. Those are things for the staff, very broad plan. And at the same time, every single unit on campus, whether it was a small academic department or a big administrative unit like facilities and maintenance or dining or something like that, every single unit had to make its own diversity and inclusion action plan, recognizing that the challenges faced by engineering to be a diverse and inclusive group are very different from those faced by facilities management or by police and security or by the Department of Hispanic Studies. Very different. So it was this global plan with support structures built into place, but ultimately every department was challenged or to make a plan that makes sense for them and held responsible to adhere to that and stick to it. So my role, in many ways, is I've been in the deputy dean of the faculty for a few years now. So a lot of the hiring faculty and working to good hiring practices and doing everything we can to hire inclusively and increase that representation. And then at the same time, make space for, make sure that once we have a more diverse crowd, that we are, ready to support it. And that, by the way, includes women in the physical sciences, which is now most recently getting a lot of attention here as well, because that I'm horrified to say that here it is in 2023 and it's still a thing.
Jen, in looking over all of the positions you've held at Brown over the decades, you're something of a utility player. You've served in an intern status in Hispanic studies, in literary arts, in theater, sociology. Right. What's the big takeaway there? How have you been able to adapt in all of these different roles?
So I part of my job was to go into departments where, for whatever reason, they didn't have a department chair. Sometimes there would be some stress for the department that there was some major conflict or something like that. And in other cases, it would just be the situation that the chair was ill or something, needed a semester off, was going on leave, and there wasn't a faculty member who was in a good position to step in or something like that. So yeah, that's a real privilege, like totally a privilege to get embedded into these departments and learn what they do and how they do it. It's so different, as you can imagine, like from being a grad student at Caltech versus being a grad student where you have to read like 50 books to do it, to be able to pass your exams, and then you have to come up with some topic about literature in the 17th century that nobody has, like seems like a thing to do. You have to do that on your own and get up in the morning and read books, and just like the day-to-day life, or even what it means to teach a course in continuum mechanics. I know how to do that. But if you're teaching a graduate course or even an advanced undergraduate course or even a freshman seminar in let's say Hispanic studies, you're basically like writing a whole book about it. You decide, there isn't like here's a subject and here's how that subject is defined. There's a little of that, but mostly the kind of teaching that goes on is so different, and just preparing for a lecture or a seminar where there's discussion. One of the faculty members in Hispanic Studies was talking about her graduate seminar, which met once a week for like 3 hours straight, And I was talking about my grad class, and she said, well, like, where's the discussion? I'm like, well, they might ask a question and I'll answer it, but you're writing equations on the board and talking and explaining, but she was floored. She couldn't believe it. And at the same time, I can't imagine, like leading a discussion for 3 hours on some literature or something or other, or much less writing a whole book about it. So it's such a privilege. And being in these different places, each one has its own approach, each one has its own thing, but it's always a learning experience. And I have to say, not most recently, I was in the sociology department, and God, what a fascinating field that is. And so I loved going to their talks or hearing their grad students' proposals and things like that, because it was pretty accessible. Like they would do a study and I could understand what they were doing and why they're doing it. Like, wow, that's really clever and it's so important. So yeah, it's a total privilege.
Janet, before we get to your research and the professor side of things, with all of your administrative responsibilities, are you able to keep up an active research agenda and teach?
No, not at all. I've been full-time in administration for about 10 years. And when I started in it, I had 2 more PhD students that finished, great students, and they finished while I was still in administration. But it's very hard to keep both things alive. Like as you know, that research requires a certain headspace and a certain amount of dedicated time to really immerse yourself in these, whatever equations or whatever the problem you're trying to solve is. And at the same time, these administrative jobs, you're constantly reacting to stuff. And it was very hard to, even to be a responsible and good advisor for these grad students, because I would, to be prepared and ready to help them and talk through their stuff and shift my head that way. So and now I've been away from it too long to go back, to be honest. To catch up would be very hard.
I've come to appreciate from my work here at Caltech how amazing the mechanics and engineering program at Brown is. Do you have a sense of that history, what the origin story of this record of excellence is?
I do, and it's interesting that it actually sort of has part of its genesis in applied math at Brown. Yes, and my thesis advisor at Caltech, a man named Eli Sternberg, who retired just after I finished and passed away soon after, he was a professor in applied math at Brown, where a lot of this work was centered. And then that sort of blew up. There was some big conflict there and people left. Most people left, a few stayed, but somehow the solid mechanics got picked up at Brown University. There was a guy named Jim Rice who was here as a assistant professor and really forged the field at Brown with a few others, Ben Friend, there's a Jack Duffy. These are people who were advisors to Ravi Chandran and Aris Rozakis. And so Alan Needleman, lots of men, they're all men, lots of people that got Brown really on the map as sort of the center of the map in the 70s.
Now, for you, from graduate school, from your life as a professor, what would be the umbrella discipline that would best describe the kind of research you've conducted in engineering and solid mechanics?
Yeah, we would call it finite deformation solid mechanics. So when the deformations get really big, so you have to use some nonlinear math to describe the geometry of the deformations, and then so that opens up a different world. When the deformations are small, most of the equations in systems are linear, and you can do a lot of solving that. When things get larger, the stuff goes nonlinear, and there are other ways for stuff to go nonlinear too, but that's mostly it. Yeah.
Well, let's go back now and establish some history. Tell me about your undergraduate experience at Princeton and how you initially got involved and interested in civil engineering.
Yeah, good question. I went to Princeton, kind of thinking I would be a physics major. I really didn't know about engineering but I, like a lot of kids, I liked physics in high school, and it so happened that my father was a physicist. And so I certainly grew up with odd looking physicists coming to
What kind of physics what kind of physics did your father do?
He did solid state physics, as it happens. But my goal was really to be a veterinarian and a total animal lover, and so that was really what I thought I would do. My plan was to go to college and then sort of become a veterinarian if I could. And so taking those courses, I found that, the biology stuff was kind of interesting, and it was very interesting, but somebody, I don't even remember who had convinced me to take a course in solid mechanics that was like the beam theory course as a sophomore, maybe, I think. I don't remember what year, and I don't even remember how I got into it, but that I really loved, and I really got into, like, my approach to biology was like, I could learn a biology thing, and I could understand, I think, that thing, but I couldn't then present it with a different biology thing. I would have to learn that thing separately, but with these other things, I felt like I could learn a foundation of stuff, and then I could do so many different things with it. And I'm sure there are people that approach biology the same way, but at that time in my life, I didn't and couldn't. So that's what kind of brought me over to the engineering side of Princeton. And I remember trying to decide when the time came in sophomore year what major to declare. And I was on the fence between biology and civil engineering. And I was talking to some faculty member, some advisor whose name I sort of pictured him, but I can't think of his name. And talking about, what should I choose? And he asked about this course, and he said, what grade did you get in it? And I said, I got an A. And he said, well, then you belong, you belong here. We want you here, or something like that. And so I did, like this guy made this offhand comment. So I stuck with engineering. And then by then I had sort of thought, well, maybe I'll just be pre-med. The word was that veterinary school was really hard to get into. And then, the more into it I got, the more I thought, maybe I'll go to grad school. And in the end, I applied to grad school in the end.
Now, did you know from the beginning that you wanted to pursue an academic life? Was graduate school sort of in the cards for you?
Totally. I had no interest in all I wanted really to do was to be a professor, a teacher, really, in that sense. Yeah, I didn't.
Sort of a generational question. How many women undergraduates were there in engineering at Princeton? Would it be normal for you to be the only one or two in a given class?
It's interesting. Princeton itself, engineering aside, had not been co-ed for very long when we started. But I don't really, so I think at that time, Princeton was maybe 1/3 female overall. And in engineering, of course, it would have been a heck of a lot less. But at the same time, I don't remember feeling, maybe because I had such good friends. One of my roommates, Terry Meistering, was a fellow engineer, and a couple of women friend engineers. So we didn't. It wasn't so striking. There were things like we took this like for fun machine shop course where you could make a brass cannon, and we didn't know what we were doing, but there would be like naked women calendars up, and we would take them down, and it was all kind of in fun and funny. So it didn't really feel like such a thing there, and I think we were still a little bit of a novelty for the faculty in the classes, but I really don't remember feeling challenged in that sense. You know, we talked about it. We had a Society of Women Engineers group there, but it didn't really feel so. It didn't feel that other at that time. At each stage, it got more and more so. Caltech definitely, and then to this day, it's still a thing, as I was saying.
Now, when you started to think about where you would apply, first of all, are you an East Coaster by birth? Was it California?
Yeah, I'm from New York, and honestly, I applied to grad schools. I think everybody at Princeton told me to apply to Caltech. I should be going to Caltech or Brown. And so I applied to those and some others, and I think in the end, I was deciding between Brown and Caltech, and I visited Brown, and it was funny that, I visited people, including Aris Rozakis at that time, who was a grad student, and I didn't visit Caltech because it was way out there, and ultimately I thought, I've never been out to California, so I should just,
Go for it.
They were all telling me that I should go there, and I hadn't been there, and you couldn't look stuff up on the web or anything like that. So I just sort of did it sight unseen, based on the fact that I had not been in California before.
Now, were there professors or mentors at Princeton who had a specific Caltech connection that were the source of that encouragement for you?
There was. Ahmed Abdel Ghaffar, who was a Caltech alum, if I'm remembering that right. And I think he worked with George Hausner, and I think he has since passed away. Abdel Ghaffar. I'm looking him up, but he certainly, if I'm remembering that right, he was one who came from Caltech. In memoriam, yeah. I'm just looking. So he passed away in 2008, and it said, did he went to Caltech? Yeah. Yes. So he was one, and there were some others also that were.
What were your impressions when you first arrived on campus in Pasadena?
Well, it was cool. I drove out with one of my college roommates, beautiful campus and everything. And I moved into, I think it was Keck House at the time, which was a graduate dorm, which was that's where I think that was a tremendously hard, and there'll be some hard stories here, and that was a very hard place to be for a woman, that grad dorm, although there was a cat that lived in the dorm, so that part was great. But, beautiful campus, and I was there a little early, and I would go to check out Santa Monica and Venice, all these cool places. And so it was really exciting, and the campus was really beautiful. And, I met some great people early on. And so it was really impressive. The workload was crushing. I don't know what the workload was like then, but at that time we took 5 courses at a time with, huge, I remember thinking, I'm doing work all the time, 24 hours, 7 days, all the time. And we were all that way. So it was a real sort of crushing workload, but there were great faculty and great fellow grad students who made it, especially after that first year.
Now, was the initial program civil engineering, and then you moved into applied mechanics?
That's right, yeah. And it was in part because one of the courses I took I was going to say as a freshman, but as a first year grad student, was elasticity and that was taught by Eli Sternberg. And I was just swept off my feet by that stuff. This stuff is amazing.
Tell me why. Why did it captivate you?
Well, he had this way of, first of all, he and the others took teaching so seriously. Like it was really, especially now, I see how when people take it seriously, but not like it was sacred. So there was nothing coming out of undergrad school. I was doing well and got good grades and stuff like that. So I could, and so I thought I knew stuff, but I did not. I knew like how to get an A or how to do well on a test, but I didn't understand what I was doing. Like I knew which equation to use for which thing and what to plug in, but that's not, and I thought that's what it meant to know something until I took those courses. And then like just what it means to know something is different. Like to own something, to internalize it, to understand where every single thing came from, exactly what assumptions went into this field theory, when they came in, what wasn't an assumption, what was an assumption, what is continuously derivable, what isn't, all those things. So that's what it means to know something, not just here's the equation and this will, use this equation when this happens. So that like you had to be able to understand something at that level, and elasticity, it was linear elasticity, but it was also like, okay, so the amount of math I learned just from that also, and how really important that knowing the math was, but also just, so all of those things in this one course, but plus this was like, for me, like this is what a field theory is, and as like this is a complete field theory, and so this is what it means to what that is. I'm blabbering a little bit, but it was much more than just like here's elasticity and here are the equations and what to do with it. It was like a really complete thing that was sort of changed my understanding of just about everything, and my approach to understanding stuff, or approach to research and teaching, that you really want to strive for this complete knowledge and understanding, and with that comes an understanding of the limitations and also the power of something.
Now, was elasticity at the core of Sternberg's research?
Yeah, finite elasticity, large deformation was what he was doing more recently. He in his younger days, he had done a lot of linear elasticity problems, and also sort of formalizing methodology. So he took tremendous pride in that course. It meant a lot to him, and he taught it really well. And so that kind of like, this is amazing, and this is what it means to understand something.
And so it was that course that explains the move from civil engineering?
That's right, yeah. And to be fair, like these things are all related. And at that time, pretty much you could do the same thing and decide whether your degree was in mechanical engineering or applied mechanics or civil engineering or even applied math. There was that much overlap. There really weren't such distinctions then.
And also from that class, it became clear to you that Sternberg should be your thesis advisor, your mentor.
If he was willing, yeah, and he was. So well, he had never had, he hadn't had a female student, and I was his last one, so.
What was his style like as a mentor?
Oh my God, he was so careful in everything he did, in his teaching and everything, and he approached that too, and he approached mentoring that way too, that he I really had to get everything right, and which we all should, but think through continuity, and is this region simply connected or not? Is this like the analytic continuation, will that really lead to the two things? Like all of these details that you could sort of gloss over, like you had to make sure everything was right. And he spent a heck of a lot of time with me, which I appreciated. but was also sometimes kind of scary, of course. He taught me how to write. I was a terrible writer, and he really spent so much time like sitting together, writing, rewriting things, and he gave me a list. I still have these somewhere of phrases. Like, here's this list of phrases like A implies B, A leads to B, B follows from A, like all these different examples like that, so that you could vary the language when you're writing a paper so pages and pages of things like that, alternate phrasing that means the same thing that you could keep near you, just so that you as vary the language and make it clearer. The other thing he did, though, I also was and still am a terrible speller, and he would keep a list of all of my spelling errors in his desk. And so it would be horrible. Like, I would make a spelling, because I had to write everything out by hand. This was in 1985, and so when we'd be going over it, there'd be a spelling error, and he'd slowly open his desk drawer to add to the list of my next spelling error. And heaven help me if it was already on the list. And I had made the error, twice, so that wasn't allowed. So he was a fairly formal man, but also very, very caring and very conscious of I remember there was one lecture, I don't remember, a seminar lecture, and the speaker made some joke about women or girls, a bunch of girls doing calculations or something or other. I don't even remember the details. And he kept turning and looking at me, and Eli, my advisor, kept turning and looking at me and sort of giving me a look. And afterwards he said, that kind of high school humor was not acceptable or something like that. This was a man in his 70s or so. And this was the 80s when we didn't talk about stuff like this much. That it's not like now that there was any kind of awareness. So he was very conscious of that, and I was grateful for that. He was very formal, but he also asked that I call him Eli, which was very hard for me because, as I say, at the time I didn't even want to know that couldn't even acknowledge that I knew he had a first name, much less use it. But he was very, very, very paternal, and he wrote me a stream of letters after I left and came to Brown. That was very moving, and I still have those. Also, the fact that he had been at Brown before, and that was an important part of his career, I think gave us a connection, and lasting connection until he died.
Janet, what was the laboratory research environment like? What were the instruments? Were computers starting to be used at this point already?
They were. I was a straight up theorist, so I didn't need them at all. But we had the labs that my friends used there, and the other students were, like labby looking things. Since I wasn't using the equipment, I can't really speak to that. But we had some computers. There was a prime computer. And ultimately, I think I used that, and I can't remember what I used for. Actually, somebody helped type my thesis for me in those days with the equations typeset in something or other. I can't even remember what it was called. It was before tech, the LaTeX and all that stuff. But we did have a prime computer. It was down the hall, and there was a few PCs were just getting started. But if we did some programming, it would have been in Fortran at that time, pretty much.
As a theorist, what were some of the prevailing theories that were useful for your research?
Well, this was all like finite elasticity, so it wasn't so much prevailing. For my thesis, I did this big system of nonlinear coupled partial differential equations and looked at existence and uniqueness of solutions to those. So it wasn't really prevailing stuff as much as it was multi-variable calculus and complex variables and things like that, sort of those math methods. It wasn't, I didn't really do anything like fancy, that relied on the sort of latest things.
What were the principal conclusions or contributions of your thesis?
Well, like many theses, there wasn't a big contribution. The contribution and conclusion was that I got the PhD, so that as is the case in most things. But no, it's a really hard problem in retrospect, and I couldn't do it in 3 dimensions. I had to do it in 2, because it was not easily solved.
I wonder if you can explain that. What does that mean to go from 3 to 2 dimensions?
So if you have a system, if you let's see, so if you a system of partial different, how much math do you know? Or how much?
I can track with you.
Okay, so if you have 3 dependent variables, think of those as coordinates in space, and 3 independent variables, the subset, which are also 3. So mapping from one 3-dimensional space to another. So this point goes to this point goes to this, had these coordinates before, and now it has these coordinates. So this kind of mapping is a 3-dimensional one. And if you use that mapping to calculate this particular strain field, as we called it, because it sort of gave you a sense of what the deformation was like in the solid object, 3-dimensional solid object here that then gets mangled and is over here. So what I was doing was taking the strain field that, if you know the mapping, you can calculate the strain field. So I was trying to go the other way. If you know the strain field itself, can you calculate the mapping? I couldn't do that in 3 dimensions, but I could do it if you take a 2-dimensional shape and map it to another 2-dimensional shape and use the strain field that comes from that. So the difference was I had 2 independent variables and 2 dependent variables for a 2-dimensional thing. I could do that. I couldn't do it when you had 3 independent variables and 3 dependent variables. Still is hard, I think. And when in retrospect, the question of how useful it was or wasn't, now in the days of academia.edu, see, like, wow, that actually got a fair number of citations, but it was sort of, was it an important contribution? No, but, it was a hard problem that, maybe it was good that somebody worked on it.
Besides Sternberg, who else was on your committee?
Jim Knowles who was another amazing, amazing guy who, they were partners. And it's funny because I looked up that maybe a year or so ago, and I think, now I can't remember, there was one guy on the committee that I saw in the Caltech thing that I was like, God, I don't even remember that name. But beyond the 2 of those, I can't say I really remember, which is terrible. Maybe Don Cohen, who was in applied math, but I don't remember.
Now, you went straight for faculty positions. Did you consider postdocs, or that wasn't really so much done in those days?
Yeah, it wasn't so much done in those days. And also, when I think about that crew of grad students that we had at that time, we did so well with getting jobs. Like, it's so hard now, and you need to do multiple postdocs, but I and most of us all went straight into faculty positions. And I was a kid. I was only 24 at that time, which is kind of mind-boggling now too, to think about how. And I was 24. You can't tell now, but I'm a pretty small person. I'm short, and then to come into a field that had no women ever. So here's this kid who's, like this kid, a girl, like the person to do this. It's kind of weird to think about.
Now, did you appreciate coming from Caltech to Brown, this history of solid mechanics there?
Totally. This was like the job, the dream job to get. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of offers at that time, but Brown was really what I wanted. So yeah, it was really, really wonderful. And so the funny thing was Aris Rozakis, you mentioned before, and I mentioned when I came to visit Brown to think of going there for grad school, I met Aris then. And then when I got out to Caltech, I saw Aris there, who's just starting his faculty position. Aris was probably on my committee too. But so yes, that connection was certainly a strong one.
Joining the faculty at Brown, what did you see as your area of specialty? What niche were you filling there?
Again, the continuum mechanics, the sort of nonlinear solid mechanics. But the funny thing was that the two places are alike, as joined in a common history but I'll honestly say when I got to Brown, like, I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. And I remember sitting there, in part because, like Aris, they were more the experimental side and more practical, and I was doing this very mathematical stuff. I still took those courses. But I would talk to the colleagues in solid mechanics. I remember Ben Friend, who was Aris's advisor, coming into my office to describe a problem on the board for me that I might be interested in working in. And I remember sitting there thinking the whole time, like, God, what is he talking about? And how am I have to come up with some kind of question or something to show I'm interested, or I can't just sit here and nod. I have to say something intelligent. And I ultimately couldn't come up with anything. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and he sort of shrugged and put his chalk down and left. But and I was thinking, I just got a PhD, I should know what this stuff. But different places have different emphases, different notation, different. I eventually learned it all, and I didn't really have a material science background at all, and so they had some of that mixed in. So I was just, like I said, I was this 24-year-old kid, and he was this, world famous senior professor who was my colleague now, and I'm sure others. I often told that story to other new faculty, so they they don't feel weird if they're. Or don't feel alone if that's their experience.
Now, were you the first woman hired into the faculty in the department at Brown?
In solid mechanics, yes, yeah.
And what about?
I'm ashamed to say that that was 1986, so that was what, 40 some years, almost 40 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I was the first and the last, so there's not been another woman in that. And yeah, that's a problem.
What about more generally? Roughly speaking, how many women faculty members were there at Brown generally when you arrived?
I don't know the exact numbers. It's still a problem, yeah, no, it was definitely really hard, and in the field too. It definitely hard. And when I talked before about leaving engineering to go to administration, and how that opened up the world for me in terms of academic fields, but it also opened up the world for me in terms of gender and other forms of diversity. So here I was at age, whatever, 50 or whatever, when I moved to administration. And for the first time in my life, I would walk into a room and there would be half women there or 3/4 women there. And it was so jarring at first, I couldn't get used to it. It was only in retrospect, to be out in that world, to think how strange it is what I was used to in the world I grew up in is, yeah, you know, it's me and 10 men, or me and 20 men, or me and the men are great. I married one. My husband's an engineer at Brown, same field, but just that you grow up in that environment. It's what you know, it's what you do. You're used to it. It can be uncomfortable and everything. Even in my case, at least, there was also a point of pride of it. But suddenly, to be in a world that wasn't that way was just like, I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think of it, but think about that. And it wasn't what made me go to administration, but that was huge. It's so much better when you don't have that thing, even though that was a point of pride for me.
Janet, as an assistant professor, how did you build up your research agenda, obviously thinking about tenure and making the strongest possible case for yourself?
Yeah, that was very stressful, as it always is for everybody. And it's hard because there's two, you know, I can say this honestly now, but there's research for science's sake and research to train graduate students and that sort of thing. And then there's research to get and papers to write in order to get tenure, or in order to get funding in order to get tenure. And I had a hard time with that. Like, I did it, certainly, but that was sort of an internal struggle that, you know, what are we doing here and why? Or what am I doing here and why? You know, obviously I have to get tenure, so I have to do certain things and I have to be strategic about it and all that stuff. But it wasn't just purely, you know, like here are the needs that the motivation, and probably for others too, but at that time was certainly.
When you put your package together, what case did you make for yourself at that point?
You know, packages in those days were different. I don't even really remember putting together a package. I think it just happened. Like, all right, you're up for tenure and you get to name 5 people and we'll pick some. And I don't remember if I had to write a statement or anything the way people do now, write a statement of research, teaching, and prepare. It's possible that I did, but I don't remember it.
There's, of course, 2 approaches, you know, in the assistant professor years. One is to be hyper-focused and to really build on the dissertation research, and the other is to broaden out. Which did you pursue?
I broadened out in part because the dissertation research, like I said, I couldn't do 3 dimensions then, and I still can't. So I think, but I still stuck with the mathematical aspects and tried to do that. But I also tried to eventually, you know, learn from my colleagues there and learn their language and their approach and join in there when I can. I probably didn't have the strongest case in the world, but who knows?
From the appreciation you had for the record of teaching, the way that teaching was taken so seriously at Caltech, did you try to pay that forward in your own teaching?
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. That was another hard thing at Brown when I started. That I remember the dean of research then, who was a physicist, and he came and introduced himself, and he said, you know, let me give you some advice. Don't spend too much time on your teaching. And I just thought, like, you know, what am I supposed to do with that? You know, like, first of all, it's a terrible thing to say, because of course you have to spend time on it. And so you're spending time on it and then you're feeling guilty because you shouldn't be, or something like that. But no, that was what I wanted to do. I mean, that was so important to me. And it also balanced so well, just as at Caltech, being a teaching assistant, and I had, you know, really good opportunities to have some good responsibility there. But that would balance. When you're totally stuck on the research and something like that, you can go and prepare your lecture and give it and go answer questions and accomplish stuff. Whereas then you go back to the same equations that you're stuck on, so there's that's a personal fulfillment, but it's also, maybe particularly, I'm really gratified to hear now from certain, particularly, former students that I was maybe made a difference for them, and particularly some women. It's really, makes me kind of tear up, but that was really, really important to me and still is.
Did you have a large graduate student cohort over the years?
No, not at all. No, I didn't have a lot of grad students. And I did focus more on teaching after I got tenure. And so I taught a lot of the big introduction to engineering courses and did a lot of mentoring and things like that, which particularly as a young and female faculty member, a lot of students would come to me anyway and find me to be, somebody who they would approach for their own mentoring support, and I was happy to give it to them, and that was important to me too.
And did you give advice to students about going to Caltech the way you got that advice?
Oh yeah. Lots of Brown students went to Caltech after I came through there. Yeah.
Jen, an overall question about your research career: was your work entirely what we'd say, basic research or fundamental research, or did you ever get involved in applications?
Yeah, I did get involved with applications with some colleagues. We did some work on head injury modeling, that level of application, but mostly it was fundamental.
Tell me about the opportunities that allowed you to get into the world of administration. First of all, as you explained, what a breath of fresh air it was. Were you looking for this, or was this sort of presented to you?
Not really. It was presented. I had a friend here in engineering, Rod Beresford, who had moved to an administrative position, and I was asking him about it. And I said, maybe, and then he recommended me. So it wasn't, and if I had chosen to go into administration, I probably would have done it on the student level, like an academic support dean or something like that for our students. But there was a new dean of the faculty. I think it was around 2011, and he was from the English department, and he needed to appoint, and at that time it was associate dean that represented the sciences. So he needed somebody from the sciences. So in desperation, he cold called me, and we met and talked and seemed like-minded. And I actually wasn't going to do it. I thought about it a lot, and I sort of gave it, talked to a few people and learn more about the position. And I typed Kevin, his name was, this message saying, Kevin, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really honored to have been asked, but I think I'm going to have to decline. So thank you anyway. And then I looked at it and I thought, I can't send that. What's my problem? Like, what do I have to lose? Don't be a dope. And so I thought I would give myself 24 hours, and the next morning I just got up and sent it before I had to think about it anymore. So that's kind of how I got there, and then I really liked it.
And so your first foray into administration was as associate dean of the faculty?
That's right, yeah.
And what kinds of things did you do and still do?
Well, at that time, so the first thing they said was, Hispanic Studies needs a chair. Here, go ahead. What? That there had been some problem in Hispanic Studies, and the person who was the chair left under questionable circumstances, and so that was terrifying because I speak no Spanish. Like I was saying before, I have no concept of. At that time, I knew nothing about what life was like in the university outside the sciences. So that was the first thing I did. And then, all kinds of things. Faculty hiring problems, complaints, department budgets, appointing department chairs, supporting department chairs, promotion, hiring, recruiting, lots and lots of stuff. It's funny, the person who had the job before me, I asked her to describe what the job was like. She said, well, it's really hard to describe. It's complicated. And I thought, what do you mean it's hard to describe? It's complicated. But here I am, 10 years later, it's hard to describe. It's complicated. So she was right.
It's sort of whatever is needed on any given day, it sounds like.
Yeah, and there were things like every year that you had to do, like and hiring and appointing chairs and onboarding chairs and answering questions and setting salaries and making job offers and stuff like that.
And did the transition away from the research, was that more gradual, or did that happen suddenly with a particular job or project?
It was, well, I wasn't doing a ton of research. I just had these grad students to see through, so that part. And as I was saying before, it was hard to do both. So I was sort of relieved when the last PhD student finished. He was an amazing student, and he went to work for Apple. But I knew then that I wouldn't take any more.
Has that been hard to some degree, leaving the world of research?
No, not at all. In fact, in some ways, this is, for me, more gratifying. It's a little more instant gratification because instead of a long-term project or longer term where you might or might not make progress on, I'm just constantly, like reacting and doing. Yes, there are things I have to plan on and work on, but they're not so uncertain. Like, here's a thing I have to do and I know I can do it. And I know I can solve this problem, or I know I can fix this. And if I can't fix this, then we'll do something else. But the research for me was always like, am I going to be able to do this, or what will the outcome be? There's some of that it's just different. So the day-to-dayness of these jobs are more reactive and handling things that are always very different and not always interesting, but so the variety of stuff is more appealing to me. There can be variety in research, but this is small scale variety. Like in a day, I might have 20 different things, ranging, like I was saying before, from the arts to chemistry to I don't know, sociology or whatever, or Africana studies or something like that. Just lots of different things in any day.
Expressing some disappointment, of course, as being the first and last woman to be hired into the department, are you well positioned to make the case that things need to change?
Oh, absolutely. But saying that and having it happen are different things. And and back to what you were asking before about diversity and inclusion, it's hard. It's a hard problem. Engineering now at Brown is certainly more gender diverse, but it so happens that most of the women faculty are in the bioengineering world or side of it. So that leaves some of the other groups, still very, very unbalanced. As Caltech was there, but that was the story of my life. But I'm glad it's not anymore. I'm not in that world anymore, and I don't miss it. In fact, the few times that I've gone back to engineering for something, and I got back, like, it's just sort of disorienting to be like in that world again and be in a room with and nothing against men whatsoever, but just to be the other and all that that entails and how exhausting and hard that can be and was for many, many years, you know.
I'm always so interested for academic administration that, the scholars, the academics who occupy these roles, of course, almost always don't have formal training in
Oh God, no.
administration. So just reflecting on your own experiences, what has been useful in drawing on your academic background, and where have been the real steep learning curves for you?
Ye- Um, I think as an engineer, you're sort of used to a methodical approach to whatever it is you're doing. So that's helpful. Even if the problems are messy, research problems are messy, but these are human problems, so they're messy in different ways. But a kind of methodical approach is helpful and structure. What has been harder has been, I think, two things. One is that to build the boundaries. I think when I first started, I was like, any problem I would jump in and really try to, a faculty member coming and upset about something, I would just like dive right in and try to help and get over involved in different situations. And I also had to learn that the tearful person in front of you may not be telling you, is telling her reality, but it may not align with the rest of it. And so I was a sucker for any description of a terrible situation. That's terrible. Let me help you. Let me fix it. But almost every situation, when you get into it, it's way more complicated. There are all kinds of different factors and sides. So that I had to learn too. I had to learn also not to internalize stuff or to, boundaries is I think a good way to put it. That like, okay, this is a thing, and I will work on it, try to help it, try to fix it. But it's not, I'm not part of it.
As you explained, thinking both about the excellent jobs that were available to you and your cohort from Caltech and what a relaxed process tenure was, thinking about...
Well, I wouldn't say it was relaxed, but yeah.
Not a big deal. It wasn't filled with... It didn't seem to overwhelm you.
Oh, it totally overwhelmed me.
Oh, it did? Okay.
I should not give that. I think it was not... the process wasn't the same as it is now with, as you said, preparing a package. I think that wasn't just part of it, but I was a wreck, as everybody was.
So for junior faculty now, for graduate school students who are on the job market, what's changed? Because obviously things have gotten more difficult.
Yeah, definitely. I think the expectations for external funding are a lot higher than they were now, and now it is more usual for people to have one or two postdocs. Tenure timetable is longer now, typically. And I think those things generally, most people will get tenure, but they have to go through a heck of a lot of stress to get there.
Janet, moving our conversation just right up to the present, in this transition year, what are your hopes and objectives to get beyond the transition year? What does the next year look like for you?
Well, we have an incoming provost, Frank Doyle, who I referred to you, who happened. So he's coming to Brown as the provost. I'll be his deputy provost, and it so happens we have the exact same career path. I mean, the exact same educational path. He was a Princeton undergrad and a Caltech engineering grad as well, and so helping him get settled and together working on the various issues going forward, and diversity is one, increasing the research profile is another, and then all of the miscellaneous challenges that arise. The university budget is one, lots of stuff. And then honestly, this is I think it was, maybe I said this earlier, I passed my sell-by date, so I can't go back to engineering anymore. I could, but like the best if used before date has long passed, so I don't plan to go back to engineering. I still hold tenure there and all that stuff, but I don't plan to do that. So at the end of this term, I plan to retire.
A few reflective questions to round out our conversation. So on the research side, the academic side, what are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments in research and mentorship and in teaching?
I think I'm probably most proud of the legions of students that I might have had a positive impact on, and graduate students, undergrads, and so I think by far that's what I'm most proud of from the engineering professor side, and I think in retrospect I am a little proud of myself for having been a woman doing all this stuff at a time when it wasn't a thing. There was no diversity plans. There was no Title IX offices. There was no language to talk about that otherness then. And it's only in retrospect that I think how hard that really was. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I would always say, it's just the same. You know what? But it wasn't. So I think in retrospect, it was really hard. And I think I give myself a little credit for getting through that at Caltech and beyond.
On the administrative side, I'm sure, there's so many things, little things that happen on a day-to-day basis that make those incremental improvements or just keep the ship running. Have you been a part of anything, or have you implemented anything that you really feel at the institutional level has improved Brown?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. Certainly being, and this will sound, and I hope this is true, and others may not, but I think to be a person in an administrative role that faculty and staff and department managers, department chairs felt that they could trust and rely on and come to with their challenges, and that I would be somebody that would be responsive and helpful. And so it's those little things, but I think that that's really important to me. There are other bigger things, but really it's that I think I guess in saying what am I most proud of is thinking of my professional life. It's those students that I touch, but I hope that I'm correct in thinking that I was able to, on some level, play that role with faculty, which, to my surprise, aren't actually that different from students in that they have needs and problems, and department chairs have real challenges, and so that I could be a person that I was and have been. I hope that person that people felt like they could come to and be honest about what their challenges are and get support, be supported, even if I couldn't solve the problem, just help, be there for them. So that's kind of what I hope. This is very self-serving, and it's not for me to say those things, but that would be what I'd be most proud of.
I'm sure you've realized, of course, in thinking about the similarities of students and faculty, that faculty just wanted to keep on being students, right?
Yeah. Or all of us, like we're all still vulnerable, even as just as student, the different vulnerabilities, but we all as humans.
That's right.
Yeah.
Finally, Janet, last question, looking to the future. When you do ultimately decide to retire, what's the benchmark? What are you looking to accomplish where you can make that transition with satisfaction?
What am I looking to accomplish before nothing really. I feel good about my career, and so it'll just be, when I feel right? Like, I don't want to hang in there and not be, you know, not be doing a good job, and I don't want to stay past that at all, like one day past that. At the same time, I want to be sure that I have some health, health left in me when I retire. And so my husband, who's also an engineering professor at Brown, retired in July, and he's very happy. But I'm happy too, so it's good.
Well, on that note, Janet, it's been a great pleasure spending this time with you. I want to thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Dave.